remember Don Shula?
I mean, he changed South Florida and how sports mattered in South Florida. He goes down as one of the titans, the gods, one of the few among four that you'd mention maybe in South Florida sports history: Dwayne Wade, Don Shula, Pat Riley, Dan Marino. That's the list. Maybe you want to include Jimmy Johnson there for what he did at the University of Miami, but he's got an expressway that runs with his name on it through this city, and he inherited sort of a cozy beach town that he helped turn into a bigger thing nationally because of how his undefeated team mattered, and furthermore, because he cleaned up Miami in the way that he represented it to the rest of the world. This was an icon who was a picture and a pillar of integrity, never with a stain of any kind, as he advocated for family and faith and football as ways of life. I know that we arrived in a place where the eulogy cleans up everybody, but you can't find the bad things to say about Don Shula.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was coming up and I started getting into football, he was kind of an older guy who always looked cool as hell in them sunglasses. And all I remember is being told that they once had an undefeated team that no one can match. But he never got over the hump with Dan Marino. That's my memory of him. But when I was looking up some stuff about him, I saw that he played in the NFL for 7 years, had 60 starts, and had 21 interceptions. That's a pick every 3 games. That dude was a ball hawk. He was cold and never quite made it to a Pro Bowl or anything like that, and only played for 7 years, which we all know you only play 7 years as a DB, you're not that good.
Here's the thing I think that people misunderstand, and they just haven't been in a place to understand this. For the youth here, the Miami Dolphins used to be a really big deal. Like, they were one of the venerable franchises, and there really isn't much Miami Dolphins history before Don Shula. Don Shula coached in Super Bowls in the 60s, in the 70s, and the 80s. He coached in a Super Bowl where his quarterback threw fewer than 10 passes, and he coached in a Super Bowl with Dan Marino in a year where Dan Marino threw for 5,000 yards. Like, the way that you think about Bill Belichick as a guy that you just give him a whole bunch of players, he's going to get a team out of it. That was the guy that Don Shula was, just strictly as a contributor to NFL football. Like, we're actually, interestingly, as much as we venerate coaches in the college ranks, we don't do it as much now in the NFL ranks, right? But when you start talking about 4 guys that you put up there, Shula's one of those 4 guys that you put up there with NFL coaching. He's up there with Bill Belichick. He's up there with George Halas. You can figure out who the 4th is on your own. I feel like Shula is absolutely the 3rd guy that you wind up putting on that list. And it can be easy to forget because it's been so long since the Dolphins have been good.
Yeah, we talk about Don Shula because of how many games he won, but I think we talk about football coaches differently than we talk about other coaches. We remember the ones who have some sort of innovation. I feel like you think about Bill Walsh is kind of changing the way that we play offense. And I don't know what Don Shula did, if there was some sort of imprint he put on the trajectory of the game and the way it's played. But I think that's part of the reason why people don't necessarily talk about him as much, because there was no kind of offshoot of the Don Shula tree.
Yeah, because, I mean, to be fair here, who else was saying, hey, go throw for 5,000 yards, Dan Marino, right? Like, they turned over the whole thing overnight. They were still pounding it in the early 80s. Marino shows up in 83, and he's like, all right, boys, game go change. And the game did change.
Yeah, so that's his contribution. It's changing to a passing style, and I was too young to remember that.
Bomani mentioned how bad the Dolphins have been recently. You're talking about 2 decades worth of stench. They've been a regional team instead of a national team. They've desecrated what it is that Don Shula built. But think about who was doing the desecrating. The mercenaries were Jimmy Johnson and Nick Saban and Bill Parcells. Like, these are the biggest names in football, and they couldn't do anything with what it is that Don Shula built.
Wanstead. Don't forget Wanstead.
He might have been the best of them. I'm not even joking.